The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi, I'm Mike Creavey, and you're listening to The Secrets of the Thin Red Line, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings of this movie. Joining me today on the panel are Andrew Hermiz. Hi, Andrew.
Hello there.
And Thomas Sanjurjo. Hi, Thomas.
Hello.
And I did want to just give everybody a quick heads up. This is not a surprise Secrets of Star Wars episode where we're going to have like Father Fett and Angela just jump on all of a sudden. So this is indeed all about the Thin Red Line, this movie from 1998 was when it was released. And we're going to kind of unpack this. I just want to give a quick little programming note. There's so much we could do with this. What we want to do is basically split it into thirds tonight and kind of look at some background and kind of our first introduction to this film, when we first saw it, what our first impressions were, and then kind of dig into really at the heart of this episode, the deeper meanings of the movie, some of the themes, some of the aesthetic stuff, like, particular, maybe, beautiful aspects of the filming, maybe the music, like just those kinds of things. And then really kind of bring it kind of to a close through some key takeaways, really the enduring things that we really take away from this, things that we continue to unpack with it, and maybe a word on some advice on maybe who to recommend this to, maybe who not to recommend it to yet, or that kind of thing. And I'd be interested if we have time to think about how you guys suggest, putting yourself in a position to really be able to take it all in. Because I think one thing we'll see if people aren't familiar with this movie, it's not really a war film the way you typically think of it. So,
yeah, not at all.
Yeah,
right.
It's a very different kind of movie. So just a quick word about the background here. As I mentioned, it's a 1998 film, directed, screenplay written, and then directed by a really legendary filmmaker, Terrence Malick. And he was coming back to filmmaking after more or less 20 years of kind of doing some different things. And this was a big deal. There were a lot of people in the film industry, producers, actors, all sorts of people who wanted to be part of this because he was making it. And you get a lot of that when you read some of the trivia and some of the behind the scenes stuff. There's a lot of really fun little tidbits there. Like my favorite thing
it was interesting to find out that Woody Harrelson stuck around like a month after shooting just so he could watch Terrence Malick work. That's awesome.
And to imagine that too, like Woody Harrelson just like following you around, or just like, hey, what are you doing over there? Bruce Willis apparently wanted to pay, like airfare for all these people so he could come over and so there were a lot of people who auditioned for parts, people who thought they would maybe have parts who didn't, people who were in it famously who thought they had very big parts who then were barely in the movie. So we'll get to some of that, as we go. But the background of this is, it says it's based on James Jones's 1962 novel of the same name. I put loosely based because, that, and to full disclosure, I don't know about you guys. Have you read the book at all?
I've read it.
You have? Okay.
I haven't read the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have not. Full disclosure, my window into this was really through this film from the get-go. But James Jones was a World War II vet. He witnessed Pearl Harbor. He was at the Battle of Guadalcanal, which this book is and then the movie is based on. And he really was probably most famous for the book From Here to Eternity, which, he was sort of a struggling author after the war. And then that was his first big breakout. And I forget what year they made it into a movie, but it was only like maybe a year or two later, that classic, World War II movie. So The Thin Red Line was a little less known. It was more about his personal experiences or based on that at the Battle of Guadalcanal. And really, it focuses specifically on the battle for Mount Austin, the Galloping Horse, and the Seahorse. So these are these three hills, these terrain features that were really instrumental in that battle. And the time frame for any of you World War II fans here, this is really during the Army phase after the Marines had kind of made some initial gains in that campaign. The Army came in from December 1942 up to the beginning of February 1943. That basically this is taking place. So to that end, It's very much, it's historically rooted. It's very much accurate in a lot of ways to that setup. But as I mentioned, and this is where I want to kick it over to you guys, it's maybe not exactly what you expect when you go to see it. So, Andrew, let me ask you first. So what was your first experience with this like?
Yeah, my first experience with this film was I was in college. I had just gone into Terrence Malick. I remember in film school watching Badlands, his first film, and I really loved that film. And watching The Thin Red Line, I was like, how did people miss this? It was easily missed because if you look back, Saving Private Ryan just came out a few months before, I think. And like we're going to talk about a lot, and like you already mentioned, this is not your typical war film. So what struck me most about the film watching it for the first time is how amazing, first of all, the cinematography is and how unique it is. His like ongoing decision in every film that he makes to intertwine nature with humanity is really stunning. And if it's really, a lot of people describe his films as just poetry. And it might sound pretentious, and maybe to a lot of people it is. I do find, I don't like all of his films. I do find some of his films really pretentious, but I think this is his best work, if I had to pick one. And because it looks, going into this film, you're thinking that you're going to get this sort of typical World War II type experience, but you have all these monologues, these inner monologues that you're hearing, asking these deep questions that a lot of mainstream films are afraid to ask, and something that interests me a lot, was really intriguing, and something that blew me away really the first time I watched it. So it stuck with me, and watching it again for this podcast, I had, since it's been a long time since I watched it, I kind of had the same experiences again, because it kind of reminded me of the questions that it was asking. And I can't, give enough praise, to this film.
Well, Thomas, how about you?
Very similar for me. This was my senior year in high school, and my family's always been big movie buffs, so we went to see it together. We had seen Saving Private Ryan earlier in the year. We had a lot of good conversations about that one. So that was in 98.
Yeah.
So it was summer 98, and then January of 99, we went to see this one. And I remember walking out of this film and saying to my family, that was awful. That was a terrible film. And that I hated it. Like, I really honestly just did not like this movie when we walked out. And then we went to lunch, and I didn't say a word. Apparently I was absolutely silent the entirety of lunch, barely ate anything. And then at the end of lunch, I was like, oh my gosh, that is the best movie I have ever seen. And that kind of solidified for my family the fact that I'm absolutely insane. But it really was. That's what this movie can do to you. You walk away and you're like, that wasn't a war movie. And then you realize, no, it was so much more than a war movie. It was so much deeper of a philosophical moment than just watching, big explosions on a screen. And and I've always kind of taken war movies with that grain of salt. Like, you're watching a war, you need to take a deeper meaning away from it. But I'd never had one like really completely embrace that and make me walk away with that sense of thinking about things. And I think that's what really bothered me about it at first, is that it was uncomfortable.
It didn't ask your permission.
Exactly. It didn't at all. Like, there was no permission asked, and it was. And then the more you thought about it, the more you processed it, the more every single tiny little thing about that movie, it was so frustratingly just poignant. Like, everything told a story, down to the casting, down to where certain actors were placed throughout the story. And and to this day, it's my absolute favorite movie. It is it is a movie I will go back to and talk about when I'm really, really evaluating a movie and how it's been put together. I'll go back to Thin Red Line and say, how does it compare to that?
Wow. Well, yeah, and I echo a lot of what you guys said. I mean, it was funny because in the research for the show here tonight, I didn't realize that Saving Private Ryan and Thin Red Line started production the same month too. Like they both started in June 97. So they were kind of intertwined, I think, in the marketing. And I don't remember exactly when I saw it. It was within the first few months that it came out. Or maybe I rented it, early 99. I was in ninth grade. And so it was, of course, this is, before 9/11. This is, for me, like I'm getting into high school and I'm starting to think about, maybe the military, military family in different ways. And so all these things are on my mind. And I had seen Saving Private Ryan. And then I saw the commercials for the Thin Red Line. And I really think the marketing of it didn't help it in that regard. Because what I remember at least is that it's like, oh man, this is going to be like the Pacific Theater Saving Private Ryan. Right. And you go to it and it starts off and it's like an alligator swimming in a river and like trees and, like, what's this war? Like, yeah. Okay, how long is this going to take? So but I very much was kind of riveted throughout it. I remember because it was not what I expected. So I think I was paying more attention to it in a sense because I was so surprised. And then it's one of these, like you guys have said, like the more I've watched it, the more I've gone back to it at different phases. Now I'm not a big grain of salt here from what, or a caveat, I should say, what I'm about to say here. I'm not putting it on the same level as sacred scripture, but the similarity that just as with like, I think scripture, even with just good literature, when you revisit it at different times, your life, different phases of your vocation or different moods you're in, how it can be a totally new experience every time. This is like that for me. And there's not many movies that do that. So that's why I really wanted to explore this, and do a whole show on it. So why don't we just go ahead then and shift into, since, we've all mentioned some of the aspects of, its effect on us initially. Why don't we dig in a little bit more to maybe going around here, and I'll start with you this time, Thomas, as far as just anything, really you want to share on the look of it, the feel, the aesthetic, whether it was how you initially saw it or just overall your collective experience of it. What really stands out to you, maybe specific shots or just anything like that, what really sets it apart?
The shot that I remember is the shot when they're first attacking the gun emplacement, and there's three guys that run up the hill and the gun goes off and you see them get shot and the camera immediately defocuses off of them. And there's this beautiful blue butterfly flying between them and the shot. And it's that contrast of the red and the blue. Oh yeah. And it's perfect Terrence Malick. It's perfect. Like I didn't know it at the time because I'd never seen another Terrence Malick film. I didn't know anything about him. This was like the first exposure I had to him. But that moment to me kind of just encapsulated the whole movie. And, I talk about this movie a lot with a lot of people and they're like, why did you even like that movie? And I'm trying to explain to them, what it is about this movie. And it's one of those things that's impossible to explain, but at the same time, you can sum it up with just one scene like that. And there's so many of them in this movie that are, the moment where they're moving through the jungle and then all of a sudden they come out of the jungle into the clearing that's been just torn down to make place for a camp. And it's brown and barren and gross and horrible after you've just come out of this green, lush beauty. Right. And they're like, that's the whole, the movie just keeps slamming you with these images like that. And so that's what I talk about a lot, is like that concept of what the thin red line meant. And I think that's something that Terrence Malick went and played with, was what is the thin red line? And he's got so many in this movie. There's so many spaces where there's just this very tiny sliver between us being civilized human beings and us being horrible, prehistoric man. And then there's the nature versus destruction and just all of them. And we'll probably talk about a lot more of them as we go through. But that was one that really struck me. And then the other thing that struck me walking away from it was the casting, because I know he had, since then I've learned that he had people like knocking down his door trying to get in this movie. But the interesting thing to me was like the biggest names in the movie had the smallest roles. Right.
Yes.
Until you like step back and then you look at what those small roles were. And it's like those small roles were all of the higher up ranking people. And they're the people that you're going to know in the history books. And so then like, I've like gone back through and looked at that and it's like, okay, it's even the ones like, Woody Harrelson with his moment where he like saves the whole platoon by jumping on the grenade that he had pulled and hadn't managed. Right. That's a story that gets told. And so it's a person that gets remembered. And so all of those big names that are going to go down in history, those were played by big name actors.
Yep.
And then the guy that's going to be completely forgotten, the guy who we see be AWOL at the very beginning, is a complete no-name at the time.
Right.
Because he's become very big since then. But Jim
no one knew he would be Jesus.
Nobody knew Jesus. Exactly. So he was, but nobody knew him at the time. He was a completely unknown actor at the time.
Yep.
But he was the crux around the whole movie was built.
Oh, and they said too, that Adrian Brody, and I've never really watched his reaction to it. I've heard other people talking about it, but his character in the book, as I understand it, Corporal Fife, was supposed to be like the central kind of character. And I was going into it this time, I had heard some of that backstory about him I hadn't known before. And so I was really paying extra close attention to like speaking parts. And I think he says like 2 or 3 things. And I think one of them is him standing next to dead bodies. And you don't even see him talking, and he's just looking, and it's really well done. Like he's looking, and you can see he's just so agitated and nervous, and just being around them. And it's like a voiceover of a conversation he's having with another soldier, like some other time, about how do you stand being around bodies, and But I was like, man, like I guess the story is he got to like the premiere, before he found out that his role had been cut to almost like nothing. So that kind of stuff, the controversy that always in one way, shape, or form seems to surround a Malick film is certainly, in the production of this. But Andrew, but what about you?
Yeah, I mean, if I would have pick a scene or a shot that has stood out for me is definitely with Jim Caviezel's character, Whit's death. I think that scene, first of all, the tension was like malleable. I mean, just when he's surrounded by the Japanese soldiers, then you start to realize that, they don't want to kill him. They just want him to surrender.
Mm.
You don't understand what they're saying, obviously, if you don't speak Japanese, but then you kind of get the sense of what's really happening. And then it's sort of that back and forth. It's like, oh, is he going to get out of this? And then you kind of see him, slowly just coming to peace with, his death. I mean, this is kind of something that's foreshadowed throughout the whole film, with his character kind of, knowing that there's an afterlife, like having that belief and having some sort of connection. Like, he mentions many times that he's seen the other side. Right. So, all that just kind of encapsulated in this scene, coming full circle to where he accepts his fate, and then it immediately cuts to a dreamlike sequence of him swimming in the water with like in the beginning of the film, when he's just coexisting with with people that he wasn't necessarily supposed to be coexisting with. For me, that you see the contrast, immediately it's like a smash cut, and there's tons of scenes like this in this film, and a lot of Terry's films is, instead of showing the gruesome nature of his death and the war in general, Terry makes the decision lots of times to just cut to a beautiful shot of nature or showing nature suffer, too in itself.
Right.
So for me, that was just stunning, and it was just a different take. I mean, you obviously, this movie is always compared to Saving Private Ryan because of, a lot of what we mentioned, it coming around the same time. Saving Private Ryan, was like the complete 180 of that. So it's really interesting, Saving Private Ryan is one of my favorite films as well. For very different reasons, obviously. But yeah, that scene is really impactful, and another scene too that's always buried in my mind when I think of this film is just when he comes face to face with the dead Japanese soldier in the dirt, like that was this, and then it was talking to him, and that whole scene in general was it was creepy, it was beautiful in its own way, and it was just something to behold. You can go on and on about the imagery in this film as we will, but those are the two that stand out for me.
Yeah, and that's, it's so interesting because with that scene, and of course it's I didn't know where it would come up, but that was in my notes too, with him and that soldier, the dead Japanese soldier, who again, in this scene, he's basically buried like under mud. Like you just see enough of his face to make out features, and there's smoke, so there's all this obscuring. And with the conversations where they don't actually show people speaking to each other, it's this kind of, dialogue going on. Every time I watch it, there's something in the back of my mind that's kind of like, where is this conversation taking place? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of just a cool, and, that's a question there's no answer to from the film. I mean, the movie raises more questions than it gives answers. That's the point of it. Is it true? I heard somewhere that Malick taught philosophy at MIT for years, something.
Yeah, that's what I read.
I wouldn't be surprised. But I should say just a real quick word here on maybe a little more plot stuff. Just again, it's tricky. It's not a real kind of linear, obviously linear plot, but basically, you get the build up to these guys moving in, and there's all this tension, as they're going in to kind of take on this next phase of this battle. And so it was further than I remembered into the movie before the actual like battle starts. I mean, it's I want to say it's close to like an hour, almost 45 minutes to an hour into it before you really start getting any shooting. And for me personally, this time around, even knowing it's coming, I just thought that was brilliant from a standpoint of like building up the anticipation for that, so it really brings you into kind of their questions and their fear and their relationships. And so by the time that starts, I felt, this time more than ever, almost like a member of this unit. And right. I haven't seen 1917 yet, but I know it's a very different kind of movie, but I've heard that they pull that off similarly for just a different kind of technique, but that can be a very effective, sort of tactic as well, just from a visual storytelling standpoint. And maybe what we could, if you guys don't mind, we could kind of get into some of these themes because they've been coming up. No particular order, but I kind of picked a few out and just that I knew would probably come up. And one of them, of course, is the big one that seems to show up in quite a few Malick films of nature and grace, or possibly nature versus grace with like a question mark. Like, is it versus grace? And I'll just mention one thing, I noticed, and then, kick it over to you, Thomas, just to sort of maybe continue this here. But when Lieutenant Colonel Tall, one of my favorite characters, is Nick Nolte, and consequently, so he's having an argument, and I can never remember how to pronounce his name. It's Casey Jones from the original Ninja Turtles movie. Is it Elias or Elias? Woody Harrelson pronounced it Elias, but
Elias, I think it's.
Is it okay? Yeah. But it looks like a lot, yeah. And I think he's of Greek ancestry. I'm pretty sure, and that's a big part of his character in the movie, at least. But they're having this sort of argument over the radio as the battle's progressing, and Nick Nolte's character is the battalion commander, and Captain Staros, he's this company commander, and Tall, played by Nick Nolte, is telling him to just get up there, go, and meanwhile, the captain's like, we can't do this. This is suicide. And you just feel it's so uncomfortable. And he's there, and there's this pause, and he just says, I refuse to follow your order. And I can't rewind and watch that scene enough, because the look on Nick Nolte's face, and he's all grizzled and angry, and he's all like scowled up, and there's all the wrinkles on his forehead. And I don't know how he does it, but the way he completely ceases and just like slips back into this unbelievably astonished, dumbfounded, like, I can't believe that this captain just told me no.
Yeah. You see the soldier completely drop away. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that seems amazing because you see that. And that's one of the things that really gets played up a lot is these characters are all, they have an element to them that's not the war.
Right.
And that we see that with the main character, being AWOL at the beginning and being drawn back in, and his complaints about not wanting to be part of the war. We see that start there. But you see with all of them that they're conflicted about what they're doing and about what their identity is. And so they have this mask that they put on that's a soldier mask. And that moment's so great because you really do just see like this guy that's taken aback. Like he's like, that doesn't happen here. Like that's not. I've got my soldier face on. That's not supposed to. They're supposed to do what I say, and suddenly he's not a soldier anymore. And you really do like it just completely drops. And I think almost all of the characters have one of those moments at some point in the film. Like where you're the big ones at least.
Well, and not only that, but too, because and that's a really good point because I hadn't thought of it quite that way. But he's like probably the most like tough in your face and grizzled and hard the whole way through. But you have that, it's short, but that moment with him where he's like whittling, and off to the side, and he very deeply, like you can see the pain and he doesn't full out sob, but like you can see he's right on the edge, and like no one sees it. And he's off to the side. We see it. And it makes me wonder, looking back on it, like he's so intense and everything, but he understands that this captain disobeying an order in combat is a very serious thing. And I almost feel like I could be wrong in this, but I almost feel like the way he goes about it, he kind of gets quiet and he's like, he doesn't yell anymore for a second. He's like, "This is a very important decision you're making, son." It's almost like he's like hinting to him, like, you shouldn't do this. Yeah. This is going to get you in big trouble, and then he kind of yells again. But there is that, that's that deeper level to him. And you're right. We see that with all these other characters. Andrew, what do you think about just with nature versus grace, or nature and grace, in as far as that theme goes?
Yeah, I think, in this film, really the connection that I see is like you're seeing the shots of nature, like they're in a jungle, basically. I mean, literally they are. And then you're seeing, the shots of them, immersed in this, atmosphere, and then the shots of, animals and trees and all that. Not to make it too simplistic, but it's like, life is a jungle sometimes, right? So it's really, yeah. And what I always go back to is one of the last lines of the film, and I forget how it exactly goes, but that monologue at the end, where it's he's saying darkness and light, are they just are they this features on the same face?
Right.
So it's like, is nature like the question being posed? Obviously, it's not one that the film's trying to answer, but is this bringing up is like, is nature just in its nature is meant to destroy itself and to destroy others, or is it vice versa? So it's really, I think that's the biggest question being asked is there a bigger hand at play, whether it's God or just the universe, whatever you want to believe, or is it really in just a matter of chance? Does everything just happen for no reason at all? So to me, that those are the big things that jump out as far as the relationship between nature and what the movie is trying to tell with its characters.
Well, I always felt too, like, it's not, like there's plenty of kind of, I never want to say pro-war, but there's plenty of more like sympathetic, or like more patriotic kind of war movies, if you want. And then there's movies that are just very like anti-war, bash, like anyone who would have anything to do with one is just, just don't even, the cancel culture almost kind of thing. Like, don't even, take that person seriously. What I really personally find interesting about this is I just always felt like this movie's so honest. It doesn't shy away at all from the fact that like this thing we call war just shouldn't exist. And it's like obvious and perhaps more obvious to the people in it, who have to go do it than anybody else. But, I don't think that he's saying that there's no right or wrong, that everything's just gray. But I always get the impression that it's like, this is really a complicated mess. And that's what all the questions are for. And so I think he makes a good point here through a lot of these monologues, especially I think it seemed like it was more than I remember being through the kid, Private Train, who you don't even see much in the movie, but has a lot of the narrating. And he's kind of like you don't know what denomination, but he has a 1 John 4:4 tattoo, greater is he who's in you than he who's in the world. And he's talking about God and stuff every now and then. But he points out this war at the heart of nature, that there's like a tension in nature. There's that life and death, and there is some violence, like the Colonel points out. Look at those vines consuming. So yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think it's just it's a very complex, textured kind of question that's not just something you can easily answer. Well,
and I think it's interesting too to watch, because there is that parallel drawn between the destruction in nature and the destruction that is going on with the war. And it's interesting when you watch it in the context of all of the destruction that's going on in the war is about trying to control things that are outside of our control, and that's, they're trying to take this tiny island in the middle of a gigantic ocean, and by the end of the movie, they've done it, but they still haven't finished. And there's a complete shift in the way that the battle's going by the end of the movie, and that to me is just indicative of like the whole thing, where you've got this, everything that they touch is a mess. And I love the color palette in this movie too. It's so beautiful, because Saving Private Ryan was great, but it was all very bleak, very dark gray, blue, not a very exciting color palette. And it was designed to be that. It was intended to be that way. Whereas this movie is very vibrant, extremely vibrant, like almost too much. And then, so every time you fall into those moments where you're like in the rat holes, or you're in the, you're in the camps, the brown just stands out,
right? Because
it's so dull, and it's so bad. It doesn't work with everything else that's going on. And, and you just see that contrast between nature might be destructive, but it's not so destructive that it tries to control everything and just flattens everything that exists. It's almost
right.
The generation of nature is in that destruction, that cycle that it goes through. Whereas the war it's a cycle, but it's not a generative cycle. It's a degenerative cycle.
Right. Like there's not to, make too fine a point of it, but there's a resurrection, like it's like a built-in resurrection motif, in the fabric of nature itself. And it's like, is that to be found in war, or is this thing coming from the other guy, so to speak?
Yeah.
Well, and let me just, I'll throw this next one I had to you guys. And this is, maybe people have seen by now. Here's this thin red line, right? Which apparently is also a line in the Jones book. Originally said they discovered the thin red line that divides the sane from the mad and the living from the dead. And like you guys, like we're on that razor edge the whole way through it. So how about that sanity, insanity? Any thoughts about that as portrayed through the movie?
Yeah, I mean, another big thing, a big theme is identity, and each character, I mean, big or small in this film, is sort of struggling with it, because they're trying to make sense of, everyone's trying to make sense of like where they're at, and because they're in war, and the human mind has to try and justify what's going on, even though war doesn't seem to make sense. Most of the time it's chaotic, it's ruthless, it's merciless, and it's just flat out brutal. But mankind can't help but try and sort that through in their own mind. And I think that's what we get in a lot of these, monologues. We're taking a deep dive into everyone's, conscience and like trying to understand where they're coming from. Obviously you have the main characters each have a different, you have, Wit, who's coming from more of a, spiritual, optimistic sort of, perspective. And Sean Penn's character is more cynical, and, Nick Nolte's character is more, just worried about power, and so but all that goes away when you're faced with death. I mean, you can believe in anything you want, but like at the end of the day, if you're faced with death, it's like, okay, what's ultimately going to be, your belief system? What's your reaction going to be? And I think that's honestly the biggest theme of the film is, and why there's so many characters, I think, is just to show as many different facets of that as possible. Mm-hmm. I think that's what Terry was trying to do.
And I like that it's not just one. We don't get just one perspective, because it's not okay to have just one perspective in this situation, because there's so many different ways to respond to it, and you see so many different responses to that same situation when confronted with death. How do we act? Who do we become?
Yeah.
And I think that, like, the return to the native peoples, when Witt's character goes back to the native peoples, and he can't reassociate with them the way he did at the beginning of the movie.
Right.
You see that it's not them that's changed, but it's him. And and he's struggling with that because he doesn't feel like he's changed. He doesn't feel like he's changed at all. And you know, as viewers, we don't really see a tremendous change in him, but something has altered in him. Like there's some lingering effect from being around the death and being part of the death that changes who he is when he tries to go back to them. And by the end of the movie, you know, he's able to reclaim some of that. I feel like his character, you know, when he comes back to that peaceful moment, he's able to reclaim that disassociation with death. But it comes at a very high cost for him.
And I find it really interesting too that he, you know, when we first see him for the first few scenes in the movie, you know, and part of it's just because of the climate that he's in too. But you know, he's usually in his like in his uniform, you know, bottoms and maybe his boots or maybe shorts, but he's always shirtless. You know, so there's always some kind of almost, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but almost like an Edenic, innocent kind of nudity. And of course, the tribal people, for the most part, are nude, or at least to some degree, maybe getting at some of that notion too, like the innocence. And when he goes back, he's not. You know, he's fully clothed. He has his rifle, and it's just interesting. It's like, here's this thing I've put on that are, you know, signs of some sort of distance between us that wasn't there before. You know, and the kid doesn't want him to, you know, be close to him and all that kind of stuff. Which reminds me, by the way, because probably some of the biggest themes here for us, certainly on this program, would be some of these ones with faith, right? You know, and faith and hope versus sort of doubt, despair. And like you were saying, Thomas, what I really find interesting is it's not just that there's not just one perspective shown, but even characters who are, for the most part, through the movie a particular way or filling a kind of a, you know, role in that. They'll go back and forth, you know. And I just wanted to bring up, I want to spend a little time maybe on Sergeant Welsh, you know, Sean Penn's character we mentioned a few times, because I find him one of the most intriguing, because I just, the more I watch it, I don't think he's quite what you think as you watch it entirely. Because, so for those who haven't seen the movie, he's the first sergeant of the company, you know, kind of the head sergeant for the company. And he's the one who kind of, you know, you first see him when he's brought Wit, Jim Caviezel's character, back to the brig, you know, like from his AWOL. So he's kind of, you know, this sort of tough big brother almost kind of character. And then you kind of see they have this tension between the two of them that really kind of goes through most of the movie of, you know, Sergeant Welsh is the sort of jaded. He says at one point, you know, the captain says he wants to give him a commendation. I can't repeat how he says it here because there's some language, but he says, you know, you say one thing about me in your orders, I'll resign my command and your commission, leave you here to run this outfit yourself. And then he just yells out, exasperated. He's like, property, you know, the whole thing's about property, and he just storms off. And so he has this seemingly just jaded, you know, he keeps a distance from everybody. He seems like he's kind of, you know, tough and weathered. But I feel like there's other characters he encounters and we encounter who are far more actually jaded and hopeless and all that kind of stuff than he is. And so I think, what do you guys think about that? Maybe I just want to throw that out there. Like, do you see that in him? Like, that there's part of him that like wants to believe, maybe, even though he never says it? Yeah,
definitely. I think, you know, his relationship with, you know, Wit's character, you know, kind of gives you an answer to that. I mean, because, yeah, he comes off as this, you know, pragmatic, you know, very, you know, again, cynical, you know, pessimist, but he really is, he really has compassion for his soldiers, and you know, he's altruistic, and he was he was sad when Whit died, and he showed that sadness, and you know, like you were saying, not everything, he wasn't what he appeared to be on the surface, and I think, you know, a lot of times, you know, people who give off that sort of cynical, you know, vibe, it's really just very surface level. You know, they're really trying to hide their insecurities and you know, ultimately hiding like what they, you know, people can't stand what they don't know, and he doesn't have the questions, you know, the answers to all the questions he has about life, and you know, seeing someone like Whit's character have an impact on him, you know, seeing how, you know, seeing someone who's just so sure that you know, of what they believe in, you know, is probably something that he's obviously seeking and wants. I think that's, at least my interpretation of what he was sort of going through as a character.
Yeah. I think we also get the advantage with Welsh of having the sort of narrative voiceover that folds his character in on itself. So he might be very jaded throughout the movie, but at the same time, by the end of it, we get that kind of re-editing of himself, where he's looking back over all of this stuff, and that's the weird thing about this movie is like trying to pick what the perspective is that it's being told from.
Right. Or the time frame.
Yeah. Because it's Terrence Malick, and that it's just that's kind of the way he does his stuff. But and it's based on a book, and the book had a definite narrator, but the movie doesn't. The movie, we don't even know half the time whether the conversations really happened or if they were just conversations that happened inside the person's head. And so I think some of it, when you look at it with the perspective that this is kind of Welsh going back and telling his story, throughout the whole movie from afterwards. That's what I thought. You see him growing into himself and like kind of going back and going, I felt that, but I really had a deeper sense of who all of these guys were, and so you get those two. You get a post Welsh plus a current contemporary Welsh, and both playing off at the same time. Yeah, and it's really kind of fun to see that. Not knowing where they are in the timeline with what they're saying, but having a full perspective of that person. And then the contrast to that is Wit, who's completely locked in that time period because he dies. Right. And he does not have a retrospective moment of himself because his story is encapsulated in what we see from the beginning moment to the end. And that's all we get of him, because that's who he is in this frame of reference that we have.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I was thinking about, another character who's not one of the main ones. I had to look him up because I didn't even, I think the only time I saw his name mentioned was when he said something off screen and I had the captions on. So Sergeant Macron, played by that's John Savage, I think, who's an interesting character because when you first see him, like, it's just this horrible. It's like when the battle's just started, they're moving up this hill, and you're just in the chaos, and you just sort of in passing see this guy who's laying there, and you think he's dead, and there's another like really like intense sergeant over top of him, and he's yelling at him, and he's like, "Get up, you're still alive." It's just like this real driven, he seems at first when we first meet him like one of these, he's like one of the really tough guys. Then like next time you see him, he's like coming down the hill and he's like a little loopy and he's picking up the grass and throwing it. He's like, this is us. This is all we are, and then he's like, don't touch me. I'm leaving, and they're all like, oh, okay, let him go. Like get him back to the rear, and then you see him again and he's sitting there and like he's freaked out, I think maybe earlier too, to trying to read his own name on his dog tags. So, you see all this, like the fear and the insanity, temptation, all that kind of stuff, or what makes that happen. But then when it's like quiet later, I don't know if this is fair to almost, in a way, it reminds me of Jeremiah, like just this, like the weeping prophet, the one who's really like letting it all out, and he's there by himself on the hill they were fighting on earlier that day. And he's standing up, just kind of screaming kind of to God, right? Like, why can they all had to die. Why I can stand right here and no one's shooting at me. And I really like that. And I don't know if most people would really take that away as like a meditation almost for faith. But I think for those who, like in our faith or whatever faith, are sometimes tempted to think that it's all about never questioning God, and I just kind of white knuckle it and just, I have faith. Faith is a gift, but it's also something we have to work on, and so I what do you guys think about that? Like maybe some characters, maybe you notice where they're not like pure as the wind-driven snow, because nobody is, but like there's a struggle that they show that really kind of is a good example, you think? I'm putting you on the spot, but I don't know.
you gotta go back through and think. Which character was it that gets the letter from his wife?
Oh, Belle. Yeah.
Oh,
Belle.
Yeah.
That was dirty.
So
dude, brutal.
But that's one of those moments that like you see the human behind the uniform, and there were. And that's another one where like the soldier drops, the soldier's gone at that point, and it's just a guy there. And it's amazing because a lot of them do it really well, where they go from being the man in uniform to just this kid who's dressed up playing soldier, and the actors do such a good job of really pulling that out. Yeah. And that was another moment where that same kind of thing happens, and you're just like, oh my gosh, these poor guys. And then you remember, they're all very young, a majority of them, especially the privates, all very young guys. So that's you really are seeing kids in uniform that are playing soldier, and they're having to be serious about it, and then all of a sudden they just get it dumped on them that it's not the reality that they were there for. And they tried to do that in Saving Private Ryan too, and I know we keep comparing these movies, but it's a good thing to do, I think, is to look at the two of them. And there were some spots where they tried to do that in Saving Private Ryan, but I don't think they ended up being as effective at it, because it always had to come back to the heroism of war in Saving Private Ryan. Whereas in this movie, there's no heroism to it. There are definitely some men that do heroic things, right? But the war itself is not heroic, and no heroes are made from the war. The heroes were already there; they just happened to be in this stressful situation, and the hero came out.
And sometimes they were the most surprised, which does happen.
Exactly. Well, and I think that was the beauty of this movie. But then the turn of that is that it doesn't have, like you were saying, it doesn't have any negative commentary to it that says, all of these people are awful.
Right.
Because that was the really beautiful thing about it, is that it really gave that very balanced perspective of not being anti-war in the sense that like all of these humans individually were awful.
Right.
But that the whole situation is just really, really bad. And it tests these people to such a point that they have to become something other than who they would be.
Right.
If they weren't in that situation.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to Private Bell's character, you just see like his wife is like his North Star. I mean, everything, he just fantasizes about her all the time, and like has this idea in his head that he's gonna go get back to her, and he's doing this for her and to provide for her and their future family, but. That letter just, kind of obviously changes things.
It's, by the way, it's for those who haven't seen it, it's literally a Dear John letter. Like, we didn't know his name. We just know it's Bell. And then the letter is literally like, Dear Jack. And you're like, oh my gosh, no.
Brutal. And then, I know the film doesn't, answer like, how he kind of pulls through it, but,
right.
But yeah, you kind of see, like, again, to what I was saying earlier, everyone has their little sort of motivation or something they need to cling on to. And then when that goes away, what happens? I think that, again, going back to this idea of like, there's no winner in a war. It's, the Americans win that battle in the end. But they, Terry makes the decision of not showing any images of victory. I mean, he's showing both sides, and both sides just look defeated. I think that's, again, just pounding on those themes and not letting up. And there's no winner and there's no right or wrong. And, we could say it over and over again, but that's really, that's really what, I think the message he's trying to convey.
Well, and, I was thinking, I mentioned you guys beforehand, I wanted to maybe throw this out there at least, but something I didn't anticipate before, just kind of prepping today a little bit more. But, Bishop Barron has really made lately, I think, Thomas Aquinas's sort of exploration of the four kinds of modes that we tend in our fallen nature to try to pursue fulfillment and happiness as, wealth, pleasure, power, and honor, or honor, fame or glory, And what hit me was, I think all of these, interestingly enough, show up in different ways to the movie. And this is just, I mentioned a few here. Like, I think Welsh, for example, whether or not it's something they're seeking, I almost put it down as like a lens through which they're kind of interpreting it, So Welsh, I was thinking like the wealth thing, of like, to him, that property line again, right? For him, the whole thing, it's just property. And but it throws that out there. It's like, well, is it? Though, he certainly thinks that, but maybe he's wrong, or maybe that's not the whole thing, but that's where he's stuck, right? Like, it's just about people taking stuff, and that's really hard. He can't get past that and how wrong that part of it would be, Pleasure. The Pleasure and Power ones, I thought, Private Dale, we didn't mention, and he's not a huge character, but so he's this guy, like, he's going around and he's like, seems to be really enjoying the pain and suffering of the defeated soldiers. He's even, and they don't really show it too explicitly, which is good, I thought, but he's even going around like with pliers, like looking for gold fillings and stuff, like pulling teeth out and like collecting them as souvenirs. But then you see him in the pouring down rain, like just shaking and haunted, and he throws the teeth away and he's like rubbing his arms, like he's trying to be like cleansed of it. You know, he it's on him. And then this other guy, you know, Sergeant Queen, who keeps having this real bad problem of shooting surrendered prisoners, you know, like this rage, this power, but it never gets him. And he always needs more. You know, he's the one, I think, who captures the alligator later. Like they're on leave at the end and he's captured this croc or this alligator or whatever. And then lastly, the honor, you know, Lieutenant Colonel Tall, right? Like Nick Nolte, it's just so like, I was passed over. This is my war. This is, you know, and he's just seemingly so focused because he's in this hell. And how does he make sense of it? By trying to find the glory of it, right? Like the honor of it. I'm going to get everybody all the awards I can get, you know? So I don't know if you guys want to say anything about any of that, but just, you know, maybe kind of wrap up here as far as like some of the deeper meanings. Anything in particular you guys think that might be, you know, like maybe real timely for us? I don't know, you know, now, today, or just something that really is perennial with this film. That's, you know, maybe not just a war, you know, like a war and peace kind of commentary, but just life and sin, you know.
I think it's really easy to get wrapped up in your circumstances as the definition of who you are. And that's one of the things that I think this movie is really good about questioning, is how much do your circumstances dictate who you are and who you can be? Because you have that great face off between the lieutenant colonel and the captain who refuses to sacrifice his men, and it's for one, it's a strategic maneuver. It's for the glory of being able to say we did it. It's that's the whole purpose of doing it. And then for the other, it's, well, I have to tell these men, go to your death. and the captain could have just as easily said, okay, let's do it, and just rushed to the gun emplacement and sacrificed as many men as it took and just made a pile of bodies that allowed them to win. But he refused to do it because he wasn't letting that circumstance dictate who he was and how he treated his men. And that's something I think that we could, you can really walk away from this movie and take that lesson that yes, life is going to throw some really horrible things at you, but you don't have to let them define who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo everything that you just said and what we've all been talking about. I think ultimately the central theme of this film is this idea of identity and making sure that, you really have to work on who you are, what type of person you are, and what you believe in. Because when you're faced with your own mortality, when you're in some existential crisis or, whatever it may be, everything just becomes pushed aside. And then usually it comes down to, well, are you going to overcome this? Or if it's something you can't overcome, how are you going to accept your fate? Something obvious like death. And I think the film, again, does a good job of offering different opinions on that. It's offering different perspectives, and it's not giving you one or the other. Obviously, we can look at it from our own Catholic perspective and say that, yeah, hopefully if we're ever faced with that, any sort of situation like that, we'll have enough faith to, overcome it and accept God's will. But, it's good for us to see such an extreme version of that. Chances are, none of us are going to be in a position like that where we're on enemy lines. It's just a way for all of us to kind of relate to a war film, because unless you were in service or you face real action, it's hard to relate until you break it down to a human level and a natural level that Terry likes to do a lot. So I think the emphasis of finding meaning in life and death, yeah, it sounds like a transcendent, maybe pretentious sort of thing to do in this sort of live in the present type culture that we live in. But it is an important question, and hopefully more people try to ask it and come to their own realizations.
Like we said at the beginning, like with Thomas, in that experience, we need more people sitting at lunch. Like, what just happened to me?
Right.
That's not fair. So, well, let me ask you guys. We got just a couple minutes left here, just to kind of wrap up. Maybe I mentioned earlier, we already kind of talked about key takeaways, but do you guys have any? I hate to use the word practical, but maybe to some degree, like who would you recommend this for? Who maybe not so much or not yet? And then any kind of like the elevator pitch advice for like how to watch it to really prime yourself to get the most out of it. I'll start with you, Andrew, and then I'll kick over to Thomas to wrap it up. I
would really recommend this to anyone. I mean, obviously, even though it's not as violent as a lot of war films, Terry's more, he doesn't like to concentrate on sort of the violence. There is some violence in the film, so I would be just wary of that as far as showing it to younger kids. But I would say this is a film that doesn't get made anymore. I mean, it's almost 3 hours long, right? Mm-hmm. So it's definitely, I would watch it in one sitting. Pay attention. This is not like leave it on in the background and do other stuff, right. But you got to watch watch the film. I would say if anyone who's watched The Irishman recently, that's like a movie you kind of have to sit down for 3 hours and take in. Kind of just practice the same sort of thing with this film. And I would say don't go into it. I think the movie's been out long enough, and obviously if you're listening to this podcast, you already got the sense that this is not a typical war film. So you're not expecting the Saving Private Ryan's Black Hawk Downs of the world. Right. This is a visual poem, and this is something that you just need to sit and think about. Maybe have a discussion. Watch it with a loved one and have a discussion about it after. I think that's the best way to sort of digest this film. And I would also say, just on a surface level, if you're just a fan of film and have an appreciation for cinematography and an appreciation for, I mean, we haven't even talked about the score. I mean, Hans Zimmer's score is this is possibly his best work, and that's saying a lot. So just as a pure film buff or film appreciation sort of thing, just go and watch it, and just if you want to just turn your brain off and just appreciate that, it's good enough to just do that. Yeah, Zimmer had a lot of experience before this, but from what I was reading too, this really kind of seems to have put him on the trajectory of what he became. He's got a lot of variety, but you think of like what you love from like Pirates of the Caribbean, Dark Knight, and any of those big films and stuff. And really interestingly enough, he's done a lot of films that have Japanese elements to it with the music, which he doesn't have any formal training in. He's just an incredible savant. So this, I think, really began a lot of that. So yeah. Well, Thomas, what do you any thoughts? I would say definitely a masterclass in how to make a movie. This is everything about this movie is really just truly amazing. And I can see, reading the stories about everybody that stuck around or that wanted to be involved or that was involved. I can see why they wanted to be, because what came out of this movie is just absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, it's so hard because I do recommend that you not watch this as a war film like that. I definitely recommend that. But at the same time, you're robbed of the subversive nature of it if you don't think this came out the same year as Saving Private Ryan. It was marketed exactly the same as Saving Private Ryan. And that's because that's when I went in. That's what I was expecting. And that subversion is what made this film so impactful to me. It was like I went in expecting a war film, and I got this just beautiful visual piece of philosophy, of depth that I was not expecting, and so it was completely blindsided by it. Right, and it's almost impossible to give someone that same experience now. But if you can, try, as long as they're going to appreciate it. Because that's the other thing I think is you don't want to have them sit down and think they're watching a war film and then go, well, that was just horrible, and not actually think about it any more than that. Right. But if you can get somebody to sit and if it's somebody that is going to think about it and say, hey, this movie came out the same year as Saving Private Ryan. It was built kind of the same way, just on the Pacific Theater. Let's watch it. That's a good way to do it. Definitely not a popcorn movie. It's not one of those that you are going to, be super entertained by, although it is a very good movie. There's nothing wrong with the pacing. Everything moves very quickly. You do feel like you're a part of everything that's going on. And amazingly, it's only one action. That's the whole movie is just one event that it focuses on.
but it's so detailed in the number of people that it covers, and it keeps you interested. And, we've talked about a lot of different characters here, but you never really feel lost. You never feel like, who's this guy? Wait a minute. What's this one over here? You really do feel each one of them is very unique, has their own space in the story and in the world. Sit and watch this with somebody who's going to appreciate it kind of as poetry. If you're a person who's into Kurosawa films, I definitely recommend this. It's got that same sort of like elevated feel to it where, it might be about samurai, but it's about more than just the samurai, and the same thing here. It might be about war, but it's about more than just the war. Yeah. And that's really what you need is to if you want to prep somebody for it, that's what you want to tell them. If you don't want to prep them for it, then, make sure that they're going to be able to appreciate it for what it is.
I really feel like it's basically like the image I got was just the kind of closing image I had in my mind was like a prism. That there's just it's a war, like you shine a war movie into it and it just turns into all this incredible array of all these different themes and deeper meanings. So well, here we're nearing the end of our show here, and we want to take a moment to thank all of our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Movies and TV shows, including Sean, Mark, Alan, Melissa, Mache, and John. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Movies and TV shows and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio. The list goes on. And also the SQPN YouTube channel, so anywhere you get your podcasts. To find previous episodes of Secrets of Movies and TV shows and to send feedback, please visit sqpn.com/secrets. You can email us at secrets@sqpn.com or follow StarQuest on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia or on Twitter at SQPN. So until next time, Andrew Hermiz, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of the Thin Red Line.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Thomas Sanjurjo, thank you so much as well.
It's been a pleasure.
Once again, I'm Mike Creavey. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Movies and TV shows on StarQuest.